You know by now that we're all about the journey. June's journey, that is. I feel this game was made for us specifically. It's the closest I've come to feeling like I've been dropped in the middle of a mystery novel set in the 1920s.
That's because you get to play as June, a globe-trotting flapper/amateur sleuth who lives to solve mysteries. You get to visit all sorts of fascinating places, from Paris to Cuba. You beat levels by identifying hidden objects in the scene. And we found that the more we play, the sharper our observational skills become.
The game is delightful, and a wonderful way to relax. I'll often pull my phone out and play it when I've got a free moment, like I'm on hold with an archive, or I'm waiting for a courthouse to open up in the morning. I'm currently on Chapter 16, meaning I'm searching for the son of June's housekeeper, who's on the run from New Orleans gamblers and the police. It's a wild time.
We know our audience is filled with folks who love a good mystery. Now is your chance to try your hand at being a sleuth yourself. Discover your inner detective when you download June's Journey for free today on iOS and Android.
Content warning, this episode contains discussion of violence and murder.
One thing that is important to remember about the legal players in the Richard Allen case is that they are all extraordinarily busy. None of them have the luxury to devote their work lives to this particular case. Nick McClelland still has to prosecute every other crime, big or small, that occurs in Carroll County. Judge Gull has a full calendar of trials to preside over. And of course, she also runs the Allen County Drug Court, which in and of itself seems like a full-time job. Defense attorneys Brad Roseley and Andy Baldwin each have huge caseloads, including obligations to appear in court, fully prepared on behalf of other clients who themselves have highly complex cases.
When we looked at the calendar, we noticed that within a period of just a few days, Andy Baldwin was required to make appearances in 2 different murder cases. We thought it would be interesting to check in on both of those cases, see Andy in action, and report back.
On Friday, July 14th, 2023, Andy appeared at a hearing in the case of Scott Wayne Schuck. Most of you have probably never heard of this case. We had not. But when we did our profile episodes of Andy earlier this year, a number of the people we interviewed told us privately that the Schuck case was one of the wildest cases that Andy had ever been involved in. That it had so many twists and turns that it would probably take a podcast a full season to chronicle them all.
Well, it turns out that those people were correct. My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
We first connected while looking into the Burger Chef murders, an Indiana cold case. Together, we built a spreadsheet documenting hundreds of cases of restaurant-related homicides. That original spreadsheet gave way to our podcast, the Murder Sheet.
Now we maintain that same research-centric, investigative approach as we look into all sorts of homicides, including unsolved cases, historical crimes, and, of course, restaurant murders.
We don't just chat about the headlines. Our podcast is a platform for our journalism. The Murder Sheet focuses on investigative reporting, thoughtful analysis, thorough research, and in-depth interviews. We're the Murder Sheet.
And this is Andy Baldwin for the defense, Scott Schuck in the murder of Rebecca Cassidy.
The Scott Wayne Schuck case is so involved and twisty that we imagine eventually someone, perhaps us, will do a deep dive on it. But for now, we want to give you a quick overview of the case.
So this case started back in 2010 when 33-year-old Rebecca Cassidy went missing. Her case was investigated by the Shelbyville, Indiana Police Department. For a while, it didn't seem like they were having much luck. Things changed in 2014 when they received some information about the possible location of Rebecca's remains. They got a report which led them to think that she might be buried in Scott Schuck's backyard. So they got a warrant and went and began digging on property belonging to Schuck. And we should note that Schuck had actually been dating Rebecca at the time she went missing. Not too long into the process of this dig, they stumbled not only on human remains, but actually on a purse which contained some identification that belonged to Rebecca. So this gave them a pretty high degree of confidence that this was, in fact, Rebecca's body that they found buried on Schuck's property. So they questioned him further, and in the course of their conversations with him, they say that he confesses. He says that he and Rebecca got into a disagreement of some sort. He violently pushed her against a wall, and then he strangled her. And after she was deceased, he buried her, hiding the body. So let's stop there for a moment, because there are a number of twists and turns in this case, and some of them are starting right now, which is what were the circumstances under which Schuck gave this confession. The defense attorneys in this case maintain with evidence that at the time Schuck was in custody of the police and talking to the police, he was already represented by Andy Baldwin. And Andy Baldwin was communicating to everyone he could. He did not want his client talking to the police. He was saying, if you guys are interrogating him, stop. If you're not interrogating him, don't start.
And how do we know that?
Well, we've gotten all this from the timeline. This is a timeline prepared by the defense attorneys that they actually filed into the case. And it indicates that Shelby County prosecutor, who then was a man named Kent Apsley, Mr. Apsley is now a judge in Shelby County, I believe. On July 29th, he requested and received a search warrant to search Schuck's house and property. The next day, Schuck is asked to go down to police headquarters and talk things over with police. This all comes from the timeline provided by the defense. And before Schuck leaves for the police headquarters, before he leaves his residence, he asks a friend of his to contact his attorney, who, of course, is Andy Baldwin, and let Andy know what was going on. As soon as Andy gets this information, he calls the Shelbyville police station, says, "Hey, I'm Scott Schuck's attorney. Stop the interview." The person who takes the call puts Andy on hold. And during this time, while he's on hold, the chief of police and prosecutor Apsley, along with a couple of deputy prosecutors, have a little mini conference trying to decide what to do, what their next step would be. And again, this comes from a timeline prepared by the defense. So I don't know if the defense is representing events the same way the prosecution would.
Right. But this is what basically the defense's argument is, essentially.
At the end of this conference, prosecutor Apsley, according to this document, tells police to go ahead and continue the interrogation.
So I guess, for non-attorneys in the audience, and also for myself, frankly, can you talk a bit about, why something like that would be considered a big deal in the course of a criminal investigation?
Basically, the whole reason we have a right to counsel is that when a person is arrested, they most likely have not had a lot of experience in the criminal justice system. They don't know what their rights are. They don't know what their obligations are. They don't really fully understand, if I say something now, maybe the police can possibly twist it later. They don't understand all of those factors, but an attorney does. And that's why it's so important for an accused person as soon as possible to have the opportunity to consult with an attorney so the attorney can apprise him of all of his rights. Maybe after talking with the attorney, you make the decision, yes, it does make sense for us to talk to the police. Maybe you don't make that decision, but that's a decision that should be informed after consultation with your attorney. And if what the defense is laying out in this timeline is correct, the prosecution in this case knowingly deprived Mr. Schuck of this right.
And I guess, dumb question, but is that against the law? Is that against the rules? Or is this a situation where this is that's not a good look for the prosecutor if this is true? Or is this a situation where it's that's grounds for something greater?
Well, basically, the easy answer is it's not clear. You have to argue about it.
Right.
I personally find it somewhat disturbing that they would basically, if these allegations are correct, rob him of his right to counsel. I think before you talk with detectives about a murder charge, that especially is a time you really need to know what all of your rights are. And you need to really go into that process fully informed and cognizant of what you are doing. Again, if these allegations are true, I find it a little bit disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
So according to these court documents, they talk to Schuck without his attorney present. And this is when Schuck supposedly makes these incriminating statements saying that he's responsible for the death of Rebecca. So he is charged with the crime. He ultimately is put on trial for this crime.
Right. I mean, which is not surprising. We should add, the points raised about the possible violation of his rights are very concerning, but also from the other side of things, her body is found in his yard and he was dating her at the time and he admits to it. So those are all something for the defense to overcome, potentially.
Those are pretty
bad facts, as they say.
Yes, those are bad facts, as they say. So Andy Baldwin and the defense attorneys tried to argue these confessions shouldn't be admitted into the trial because they were taken under improper circumstances. But things don't even reach that point, because during the opening statement in the trial back in 2015, Andy drops a bombshell. He says, when Scott Schuck made these statements, he was lying. And here's why. He was protecting the identity of the real killer. And the real killer was Wilma Schuck, Scott's mother. So Schuck would later elaborate a little bit on this story in an interview he gave with Bennett Haberly of Wish TV. I'm going to read a little bit of what Schuck told him. My mom picked a frying pan up and cracked Rebecca. Hit her hard. I did not see it, but Rebecca had fell in front of me in my lap, and that's why I looked up and seen my mom, and I'm like, what the hell? So according to Schuck, at this point, he steps outside, and when he comes back in, his mom, Wilma, is on top of Rebecca, presumably strangling her. And Schuck then says he helped his mom bury Rebecca in the backyard. So this is a shocking development.
Yes, very shocking.
What do you make of it?
I try to be fair when I look at something like this. From the one hand, sometimes crimes are more complicated than they appear, right? It might be the usual norm for a man to strangle to death his romantic partner, who is a woman, and be the perpetrator in most cases, but we have to be open-minded to situations where, again, it might be more complicated. You could say that the bond between a parent and child, especially in a dysfunctional family, is very strong, and maybe the child feels like they need to protect the parent. At the same time, if you're looking at it from maybe the more prosecutorial side, it's sort of like, well, isn't that convenient? And it sounds, but it definitely is one of those crimes that if it played out that way, it's unusual and kind of grabbing, because it's like the person everyone would assume did it was actually just a witness. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like without knowing more of the evidence, I don't know if I want to give a very strong opinion on what I make of it beyond what I just said.
So soon after this bombshell is dropped in court, Schuck actually takes a plea deal from the prosecution. In return to pleading guilty to being a habitual offender and to aiding involuntary manslaughter, he pleads guilty. And part of the deal is that authorities promise not to charge his mother, Wilma, for her alleged role in the killing.
What does that mean? I guess, in your view, does that essentially mean that the prosecutors found his story credible because they were willing to deal with him? Or could something else be at play? I know plea deals are often a good way to settle things because, like, no surprises, except in this case, no surprises, and there's an opportunity for negotiation, and there's no risk with the jury. Now, we've heard from Andy Baldwin's colleagues that he really likes to take things to, if he feels he has a strong case, he wants to take it to trial. Obviously, sometimes he defers to the wishes of his client, naturally.
Probably always defers to the wishes
let's say he always defers to the wishes of his client. That's what every defense attorney does or should be doing.
And also, it's very easy for a defense attorney to say, let's fight it all the way.
But I'm going to jail potentially, or I'm going to prison.
If they fight it and lose, the defense attorney probably has a bad night, but then he wakes up the next day, has another client. The client who fought it and lost ends up having to
They're going to be more risk adverse.
They're going to be waking up a lot of mornings in prison.
But it also does tell you about Andy's style as an attorney, that oftentimes he's kind of like, I'm confident that we could potentially win over a jury on this. I don't think that's just being risky in his behavior. I think there's a level of confidence there of like, I think we can actually tell them a story that they're going to believe, and it's going to convince them that there's reasonable doubt here, or that you're actually just factually innocent.
One thing it tells me, for whatever it's worth, is that Scott Schuck really and truly wished to protect his mother. Whether he was protecting her when he made this confession or not, we don't know. I'm not going to say one way or the other, but it seems that part of the inducement to take this plea was, in fact, to protect his mother.
And you could look at that one of two ways. It's like she did the killing, and he tried to protect her. Then he was honest about it, but then he still wanted to protect her ultimately, which tracks. But also, if he threw her under the bus, then there might be some guilt there.
I think it's worth noting that Rebecca's sister Michelle released a statement about this to 24-Hour News 8. My sister and I are not happy with the plea agreement. We do not feel like justice was served. And I can certainly understand that feeling, because if you take the story seriously that was put forth in court, that Rebecca was killed by Wilma Schuck, and Wilma is not going to pay any consequences for that, that's pretty galling.
Yeah, that's extremely galling. And I can understand the family's perspective. If they believe that Wilma did it, then she gets off scot-free in that scenario. If they believe that Schuck did it, then again, it's like he's blaming someone else. And it's a frustrating situation for the victim's family, no matter what, in that situation. And you're probably pretty angry at both of them, because it's sort of like, people in this house knew that our sister was buried in this yard for all these years while we were looking for her and worried about her. And I mean, that's a pretty horrifying thought.
It really is.
Yeah.
So Schuck, after this deal, ends up getting sentenced to 30 years. His mom subsequently passes away. Now, you think that would be the end of the story, but it's not.
HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit for a reason. HelloFresh really wants you to have it all. Free time and fresh, tasty food. That's why they take care of all the meal planning and deliver the ingredients, so everything you need to whip up a delicious meal arrives right to your door. We love the convenience of getting high-quality, pre-measured ingredients shipped right to our door, so we can have the fun of cooking meals together in the kitchen without the pressure of worrying about whether or not we have all the items we need.
And let me stress that when we say high-quality ingredients, we really mean it. The last time I was in the grocery store, some of the produce I saw looked like it had been sitting out for weeks. And that is frustrating, because this is the peak time for summer produce. Well, HelloFresh makes sure that their ingredients travel from the farm to your front door in less than 7 days. And when something is that fresh, it simply tastes better.
This is another great reason to try out HelloFresh. And remember, Murder Sheet listeners get a special discount.
Go to HelloFresh.com/MSheet50 and use code MSheet50 for 50% off plus free shipping. Again, go to HelloFresh.com/MSheet50 and use code MSheet50 for 50% off plus free shipping. Find out why HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit.
We are so delighted to work with our sponsor, Brilliant Earth. This is a company that offers some of the most brilliant and romantic engagement rings and wedding bands out there, all the while ensuring a commitment to ethical sourcing and sustainability.
If you're looking to get married or to become engaged, or even if you're just searching for a special piece of fine jewelry, you have to check out their website. They make browsing so easy.
They even let you design your own perfect engagement ring, or you can shop by style. I love the delicate willow rings, along with the 3-stone Nadia rings and the classic freesia rings. It's so hard to choose.
And you don't have to worry about the ethical implications of your purchase. Your special gift, your engagement ring, your wedding band should never be tarnished by the idea that the gems or materials came from an abusive system.
See, Brilliant Earth has a commitment to beyond conflict-free diamonds. That means one thing. They only accept diamonds from mining operations in countries that strictly follow international labor, trade, and environmental standards. Fewer than 1% of other diamond suppliers meet Brilliant Earth standards.
You can feel good about your purchase, knowing that you're supporting a brand that actually cares about its ethical impact and is committed to fostering better standards in the jewelry business.
Check out all of their beautiful pieces at brilliantearth.com. That's brilliantearth.com.
Schuck and his legal team keep fighting, and they maintain that what Schuck admitted doing, which was basically, he said, I was present when my mother committed this crime. I didn't help her commit it. I didn't talk her into committing it. I didn't manipulate her into committing it. All I did was I was there when it happened. And they made the argument that if you're just there when a crime happens, you can't be said to be guilty of aiding in that crime. So therefore, their argument was there's actually not a factual basis for him to be found guilty of this crime, even though he pled guilty to it.
I have a question just on a technical level. I know what ends up happening here, obviously, but in a situation like that, if it's essentially, there's no factual basis based on what this person admitted to being guilty of a specific charge, how does a prosecutor not catch that? Like, let me give a silly example. If I'm the prosecutor of the Greenlee Kane household, as I am, and, I say, Kevin, you are guilty of making a mess in the kitchen because you didn't mow the lawn. Like, that doesn't really track because not mowing the lawn makes the yard messy. And, that has nothing to do with the kitchen. They're completely different spaces. You could say I made a mess as a prosecutor. I'm using a really dumb example just to drive it home, folks. I'm sorry. I'm very tired right now. So not my best analogy in the world. I mean, are things more complicated in real criminal court cases, or is this a potential big oversight for the prosecution?
Things are pretty complicated in real court cases. And oftentimes in real court cases, you just have your job. You just have your eyes straight ahead on what you're working on. And maybe you're not looking at everything with the same depth and attention to detail as perhaps you should. Maybe you're just thinking, he says he didn't kill her, but maybe I can get him to agree to aiding manslaughter and he'll take a deal. And maybe you shouldn't be quite so cavalier about it, but those things happen.
I would think not, because then you could get in a situation like we are now in.
But the fact that things like that happen in the process is why we have an appeals court.
Right. Okay, I understand.
So the court ends up agreeing and they vacate Schuck's guilty plea and his sentence. So basically, the whole process starts all over again. Now, there's a couple of things we haven't mentioned yet. And this is confusing and mysterious, and I acknowledge that, and I find it confusing and mysterious. Repeatedly throughout this entire process, the defense team has tried to subpoena the original prosecutor on the case and a couple of members of his team. Presumably that's because they want to get information about their allegations of prosecutorial misconduct. Because they feel, again, they gave permission for the police to talk to him when he had an attorney and his attorney wasn't there. And I think there's also some concerns that when the prosecutor originally read the confession that Schuck gave, he said, this is a manslaughter case, and he wanted to charge him with manslaughter, but then he changes his mind the next day and charges him with murder. So they want to know, I imagine, what made him change his mind and make the charge more severe? What made him allow the interrogation to continue, even though the attorneys weren't present? And before I get too much further down this road, I do want to point out that the prosecutor in the case ended up recusing himself very early on in the process, and a special prosecutor was appointed. Now, the exact reason why the prosecutor recused himself has not been revealed. The defense seems really anxious for that reason to be put out there, but it's been sealed. I'm going to read a couple of lines from a recent order in this case issued by the judge in this case, which kind of hints at what that reason might be. In particular, in this document, the judge is responding to a request by the defense to depose the prosecutor and his team. The court interprets defendant's request for these depositions as an opportunity to delve into underlying issues currently contained in the court's file and under seal, which concern an alleged incident some 38 years ago between then prosecutor Apsley and the defendant. Those allegations are disputed and remain unsubstantiated. So basically, the implication is that the defense feels whatever this incident was somehow could have played a role, could have influenced some decisions the prosecutor made in the case.
Okay.
Now, there's some problems here, which is that since it's under seal, we don't know what this incident is. We don't know what evidence there is that this incident even happened. So it could be a case where basically Schuck made something up to try to have a reason to explain why somebody was out to get him. It could also be a case where something very bad happened to Schuck and he's trying to get the word out about it, and the legal authorities in Shelby County won't let him do it. Now, since we don't know what this incident is or the evidence for it, it's difficult for us to evaluate that claim.
But it's still interesting.
It is very interesting. It's very intriguing.
In fact, this incident brought the hearing that we went to today to a screeching halt pretty quickly.
Yeah, why don't we talk about that?
Yeah. We went to a suppression hearing in the Schuck case today on July 14th, 2023. It's a Friday. So we went down to Shelbyville, went to the courthouse. There was only really a few minutes of the hearing where that were open to the public, because essentially once this incident came up, it was kind of like,
well, let's talk about it. Andy Baldwin stands up and says, we're going to be talking about a couple of motions today, and we're going to be introducing a couple of witnesses who will be giving testimony. And they called the first witness to the stand. What was that witness like?
He was a person who had been friends with Schuck for a long time. He seemed like just a normal guy, I guess. In terms of vibes.
This is a man who said he's basically held the same job for 30-some years. So seems to be a rather stable person.
Stable person, has been married for a long time, too. So, establishing himself as a stable person in the community, and a longtime friend of Schuck, simply.
Yeah, and so the first questions were
establishing that.
Yeah, and Andy Baldwin says, "Oh, basically, tell us how you know him and about your relationship." And the witness started talking about where there was a time in the late 80s, I believe 1988, where the witness, who was then, I guess, a teenager, was having some trouble with his parents. And so because of that, he moved out of his parents' house and moved in for about 6 months with Scott Schuck.
It's interesting. We've talked a bit in the past and in our profile episodes on Andy Baldwin about, sort of his reputation as a storyteller. And I would say the storytelling equivalent of this kind of thing is almost like setting up a character, like, highlighting the details that inform the audience about what this character is like, what they can bring to the table. So it's just kind of, this is a solid guy. This is a person who is trustworthy, and here's what he has to say.
And he says, so when you were staying with him in 1988, I'm paraphrasing here, when you were staying with him in 1988, did he ever have occasion to tell you about an incident which had occurred a few years earlier? And at this point, the prosecutor strenuously objects. This is hearsay. We know what this is about. We don't feel it should be heard. So what happened then?
There's some back and forth between defense, aka Andy, the prosecutor, and the bench, the judge who was presiding over this. And they're basically kind of like, I think the judge at first is kind of like, okay, well, what does the defense have to say about that? Any response, prosecutor? So he's kind of almost refereeing this back and forth.
The prosecution was saying, we don't think this is relevant. And Andy Baldwin is saying, whatever you think about it, at the very least, we need to establish a record of what this man has to say. And so at that point, the judge says, okay, everybody in this courtroom who is not a party in this case or an attorney in this case has to leave, and we'll hear this testimony.
There were not a lot of people there. So I think one of the criminal defense team members was there, I think, or at least I assumed, like, it was the young man sitting next to us, I think. And then
his co-counsel, Andy Baldwin's co-counsel in the case was David Hennessy, who's a veteran defense attorney here in Indianapolis.
And they worked together on that Caden Smith case that we've talked about in the past, where they got the gun thrown out temporarily, it got back in. But so that's who he's working with on this. I do want to note that the prosecutor said that in response to Andy wanting to put it on the record, basically, this has been almost shot down so many times before. This is a situation where, like, basically again and again, the judge has said, no, we shouldn't have this in here. And basically almost therefore accused the defense of trying to get it in once again. So I think that kind of shows the level of back and forth between prosecution and defense on this issue.
Yeah, it's clear that this is an issue that has been discussed frequently, and I think it's an issue that it's fair to say that both sides feel strongly about.
Yeah, definitely.
And the defense team has tried again and again to subpoena the former prosecutor and his team, and the state has always objected to it.
And meanwhile, this case just continues to be baffling because you have all these things kind of going back and forth for a very long time, and it's really not what you picture when you picture a murder trial. It's not. It's like, I think we're all used to, because of the way we consume stories about crime through true crime documentaries or fictionalized accounts, there's like a narrative cohesion to those stories where it's like, we found the clues, we did the trial, the person was either acquitted or convicted, and now we have answers. Here's what happened. In a case like this, in a story like this, there's no such cohesion. It just feels like this is a case that's going in circles for a long time. And it shows you that can happen because real life is obviously a lot less cohesive narratively than fiction or even, highly edited journalistic stories about real cases. No one's making executive storytelling decisions. Things are just happening the way they're happening. And in this case, that means that basically it's back to square one after all these years.
And it's going to be an interesting case to follow, because I imagine if we have a situation where Rebecca is in a house with Schuck and Schuck's mother, and Rebecca ends up dead and buried in the backyard, it would be very difficult to establish, was it Schuck or was it his mother that was the prime mover here? Who was it that attacked her and killed her?
Sans DNA, basically.
Yeah.
Sans any really compelling forensic evidence. And I mean, I think it's a really important reminder, too, for other cases. I'm not going to be preemptive here and say the prosecution messed up or did something bad, because I don't feel like we've seen enough play out yet for us to conclusively state an opinion at this time. We may feel things privately, but I don't feel like we need to be like staking, a position right now. I think it's more of just, we note some of this with interest, and some of it sounds concerning. Some of it we'd want more information on. But I think it is fair to say that cases like this are kind of a good indicator of why things need to be so buttoned up in a murder trial, especially on both the defense and the prosecution sides. Because if they're not, and if, turns out, okay, the charge doesn't really match what he confessed to, or, the defense was incompetent in some way, or any other number of things, then you can see an appeal basically undo all that, all the progress, and everything has to start again. It's not, that can happen in any case, really. And it shows you why things are done in such a way, because ultimately it's about following the law and protecting people's rights. That's what the court system is for. And if those rights get infringed, or things are going wrong, or then things, you got to do it again, basically.
So it'd be interesting to follow this case. I'm curious to know what evidence they have indicating who was it that actually killed her. I'm curious as to why the prosecutors seemingly allowed an interrogation to happen without Schuck's attorneys present. I'm curious about this mysterious incident from 38 years ago. What sort of questions do you have that you'd like to see answered in this case?
I'd love to, and I need to dive into it more, I think, but I'd just love to see the breadth of evidence, for the defense, for the prosecution, and just like look at it all together and, understand a bit more about, how much room there is for, possibly reasonable doubt here. And I think I'm just interested to see where it's going, because you have, basically everyone's been through this before, right? And now they're going through it again. So it's like a very, I'm sure, determined prosecution team, a very determined defense team led by Andy Baldwin, who of course is a prolific and very well regarded defense attorney, and so is David Hennessy.
David Hennessy has a terrific reputation in the Indiana legal community.
So it's like, I'm very curious to see where this is going to go. And as I stated, I guess I just I'd love to kind of almost just, what happened here? Because it's not, when you basically hear about, a woman found buried in her boyfriend's yard, that sounds pretty open and closed, but obviously this case isn't to the point where there was just a conviction that stuck, or a plea that stuck. It's going back and forth. So where's it going? I'll be very curious to see.
We will definitely keep an eye on it. And meanwhile, this hearing, as we said, was on Friday, July 14th, 2023. On Monday, July 17th, 2023, in another county, Andy Baldwin is starting to conduct an actual murder trial where he's defending someone. We plan to be present for at least the first few days of that, and we will come back later in this week to let you know what's going on and what it's like to see him in action and to hear one of his famous opening statements. Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at
murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for the Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening. Hello, Murder Sheet listeners. Thank you so much for sticking with us until the very end. Just wanted to take a moment as we close out to thank our sponsor, HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. They are #1 for a reason, folks. Kevin and I have been loving the meals we're getting from HelloFresh. We're talking farm fresh produce, protein, all sorts of customizable options to get you exactly what you and your family need. It's very delicious, it's very nutritious, and it's quite affordable. So it ticks off all our boxes. We've been very happy with the service. And, would love for you guys to try it out if you're curious, or if you've tried it out in the past and enjoyed it, get that discount. It's hellofresh.com/msheet16. And then you're going to plug in the code msheet16. You get 16 free meals plus free shipping. You can't beat that. We've really been delighted by it. We work very hard on the podcast. It takes up a lot of time. It's our small business. We really enjoy the work. We enjoy conversing with all of you every week. But at the same time, it's nice for Kevin and I to kind of have something to do outside of office hours, and cooking these meals has been really fun. We're terrible in the kitchen, like disastrous. I mean, like I can tell you horror stories. I probably shouldn't get into it on the podcast, but I mean, some pretty disastrous moments involving our cooking. Nothing life-threatening, but definitely stuff that we tried to be overly ambitious about, and it either went horribly wrong or it ended up costing like way more than it should have because we didn't properly like think about ingredients, and we're not gifted in the realm of the kitchen. But HelloFresh makes us pretend like we are, because everything is so pre-portioned and pre-planned, and the instructions are super clear, so like you're not going to mess it up if you're like us. And if you're good in the kitchen, then it's just less of a hassle, and you get everything that you need. You don't have to run out to the grocery store. So super nice. Try it out. I've really enjoyed the meals that they've sent us so far. I can say that Kevin has too. I highlight that because Kevin is pretty picky when it comes to food. He does not like everything. He has pretty strong specifications and preferences. Very much cares about things like fresh produce and farm produce and things like that. So he's very picky, and I think the fact that he is really enjoying HelloFresh is a testament to the quality here, because he's a stickler for that kind of thing. And so if you are, I think you will enjoy it as well. And again, the URL and promo code that'll get you a sweet discount is hellofresh.com/msheet16. That's MSHEET 16. And use code msheet16. You're going to get 16 free meals plus free shipping. We hope you enjoy it. And again, thank you so much